I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. Will, in the biggest win of the Billy Napier era, Florida follows up a victory at home against Ole Miss with another home win. We did it again, back to back. That's been a problem during the Billy Napier era. This time against what we both referred to as the best team this Florida squad will play this entire year. Ole Miss outgained Florida by over 100 yards on the stat sheet, but missed a field goal, short field goal, by the way, not too long there. Two turnovers on downs because they kept letting Fat Boy run the stretch play. One muff punt return in the second half when the defense was on fire for Ole Miss, which led to a Florida field goal. And two, which maybe we can even call three interceptions. We'll give Dijon some love, even though he technically didn't catch it, but two interceptions at the end of the game, and it leads to what will likely be seen as the defining moment of year three and hopefully the turning point of the entire Billy Napier era at Florida. Will, it's a huge win. It knocks Ole Miss out of the playoffs. You get to see them follow up a big moment last week in the swamp with another big moment, and I can't stress how excited I am over this because that has been the Achilles heel of the Billy Napier era. We got multiple. You're only supposed to have one or two Achilles heels. We got multiple Achilles heels to choose from over time, but just the following up success with more success has been a problem. They did it. They did it, and you have to, before we dive in and analyze anything too deep here, you have to give them some credit for coming out and getting the job done against Ole Miss on Saturday in the swamp.
Yeah, I mean, I'll channel my inner Johnny Drama. Victory! Like, it's been a long time since Florida's beaten two ranked teams in a row, whether it's in the swamp, whether it's on the road, whether it's, in a neutral site or anything like that. And we looked at this final 5 game stretch of the season to start with, and there weren't any guaranteed wins in here. We might have had some toss-ups in our preseason preview, but it was entirely possible that the team was going to go over on the back end. Now, certainly LSU's come back to the pack a little bit this year. Florida State, who we'll talk about, has obviously come back to the pack, but Ole Miss, one of the big boys in the SEC this year. You look at their underlying stats; they're really, really good. And Florida played with Georgia for 3 quarters, though I think the stats there suggest Georgia would have won that game if obviously you got Lagway going out early too, so that's a dynamic. Get boat raced by Texas, but are able to turn it around these last 2 days. And look, I mean, I think the cynic in me looks at it and says this is a 6-5 team. But the optimist in me says the 6-5 team has figured some stuff out, particularly at quarterback, the most important position on the field. And so, obviously there's some optimism because with DJ Lagway in there, he's 2-1 as a starter. The only loss is the game where he was ahead 10-3 when he went out with the injury against Georgia. He made a huge play to tie the game against Tennessee and put that one into overtime. He's made huge play after huge play when they've needed it. The throw to DK in the game against Ole Miss that sets up the game-winning touchdown. The drive after Ole Miss went up 14-7 and looked like they were about to take control. After his interception, he immediately comes out, drives Florida down the field, gets him to 14-14. And then the LSU, the one where he's stepping up in the pocket and hitting Badger down at the 1 yard line. So like every single game that Florida's won or even been in this year, where DJ Lagway's gotten significant time, there's really kind of a signature moment in there where you look at it and go, whoa. And I mean, in this one, it might even be the thing he threw underhand on that little screen pass where you're just like, how the hell did he do that? So there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to Lagway and about this team and the way the defense played, particularly in the second half. And so, yeah, man, it's been a long time since I've been excited about the Florida Gators. Even when they've won some games, it's either been against an inferior opponent or it's been because the opponent beat themselves. You could say that Ole Miss helped them along in this one, but at the same time, Florida didn't have any like catastrophic just meltdowns that cost them this game, and that sort of happened in the past. I mean, think about the Tennessee game; they had an opportunity to be up 20 after the first half. Instead, it's 3-0. In this game, it was Ole Miss who had the majority of the meltdowns. Florida takes advantage of it and gets out of the swamp with a win.
Yeah, if you're an Ole Miss fan, you're probably looking at this game going, "Hey, yeah, we shot ourselves in the foot plenty of times." I listed them off at the beginning of the episode here.
You're going, can we switch lane for Billy Napier?
Yeah, the satisfaction must be good there, Billy Napier there. But you look at this offense to hold them to 3 points in the second half, and granted that those two stops, the two turnovers on downs were massive. The defense just being nails at the end of the game, where you're coming up with play after play in the secondary, and it's a depleted secondary. Just it, what can you say, Will? This whole team, this whole season has been one of the more fascinating. I think this is going to go down in history as one of the most interesting seasons of Gator football because you've had the lowest of lows and what feels like this is up there with any win I can remember as a Florida fan. And really, it's like you said, to keep it in perspective, you have to look at the whole thing, and we will dissect the whole thing at some point. But just from a week to week basis, the lows and the highs of this season. I can't remember another season where there's been a bigger different difference week to week than take yourself at I don't know like at 7 p.m. on September 14th to about 4 p.m. last Saturday. The highest of highs and lows in one season almost.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there certainly has been a lot of that this year. I think a lot of what we will remember from this season is going to be tied to what happens in the next season and the season after that, right? That
Yes.
that if you think about it, I said this at Gators Breakdown last night, that if like Ron Zook when he left the program when he was fired was just reviled in Gainesville and within the Gator program. But after you get the national championships in 2006 and 2008, oh, Ron Zook filled the cabinet for Urban Meyer, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden Zook has a
Hmm.
much different there's a much different opinion of Zook in Gainesville today than there was when he left. And so, if Urban Meyer comes in and everything falls apart, Ron Zook is sort of the beginning. Like let's say Urban Meyer never has that run, and he basically just ends up putting up a Will Muschamp type 4 or 5 years. And then you go Muschamp, McElwain, Mullen, and you go through that whole progression. At this point, we're looking at Zook as like the start of the line of all of the disaster that's been reaped upon the Gator program. Because he was sandwiched between Spurrier and Urban, we don't think of him that way. We think of Muschamp as the demarcation line where everything started to go downhill. And justifiably so because of what happened in 2006, 2008, and 2009. However, if I take a step back, that's really what's going to come from this, right? Is that if DJ Lagway ends up winning a Heisman Trophy, gets a statue out front of the stadium, Florida can put together some semblance of a defense over the next couple of years and can win, 21, 22, 23 games over the course of the next 2 years, then these two games are going to be seen as a demarcation line. But even that, you got to be a little bit careful because I remember in Dan Mullen's first season in 2018, I went down for the Missouri game, and it was a miserable experience. And Florida dropped to 6-3, and Felipe Franks looked terrible. And then the next week, they looked awful in the first half against South Carolina. Then they engineered a comeback, and all of a sudden, they ripped off a bunch of wins, end up with 10 wins at the end of the season, beat Michigan in a bowl game, and you're sitting there going, oh, here we go. Everything's taking off. And look, over the next year or two, Florida did play really, really well, and then everything sort of fell off. Same thing, if you go back and look at Ole Miss, the last time Ole Miss played in the swamp in 2015, that was really Will Gur's arrival. Obviously, the week prior, he had the comeback with Antonio Callaway, but we were still like, is he really that guy? Like, is he really going to be that quarterback who can lead us to where we need to go? And he was able to do it against Ole Miss, and then looked pretty good the next week against Missouri, and then obviously everything fell out. So we remember things, and humans are like this in general, is you remember things fondly if they fit the narrative, and you forget them if they don't. So if Florida goes 7-6 next year, these games mean almost nothing. If Florida goes 11-1 and ends up in the playoff, then these games mean everything. And so it's exciting that these games can mean everything, but it's not necessary. I don't know that we're necessarily there yet. But the thing I would say that it means is that Florida played and beat a legitimate SEC title contender. And when's the last time Florida played and beat a legitimate SEC title defender? I'd say it's probably 2020 when they beat Georgia,
Hmm.
right? When Kyle
Been a
Trask went in
minute.
there and lit up Georgia on all the wheel routes, and then the wheels fell off for Dan Mullen from that point forward. But that's the last time. So it's been 4 years. So, as much as I want to look big picture and as much as I want to say, what's this going to mean and all that sort of stuff, and that's kind of how I'm wired, I still want to take a step back and say Florida beat a legitimate contender for the SEC championship. And they did it in a way where they won up front. Like they won on the defensive line, they won on the offensive line. And so, yes, Ole Miss helped them in various ways, but Florida won up front. And when you win up front and you have the better quarterback, which Florida also had on Saturday, you're going to win a lot of games that way.
It's okay to enjoy the moment, Will. Enjoy we like and that's why I look at the fans and it's funny. It's funny you're seeing people out there like, I owe Billy Napier an apology and blah blah blah. It's like it's okay to enjoy the moment without making a referendum on the program positively or negatively. Just enjoy this moment and we can look at some of the deficiencies in the offseason still while also really enjoying the fact that hey, that's honestly the best thing about this game, Will. It's not like we played perfectly. We made plenty of mistakes still. It's this team is not they didn't come out and play some flawless game and Lagway had 400 yards of passing. There was a stretch there. It was just like LSU. It was a battle into the fourth quarter. You're going down the fourth quarter, and they're finding ways to make plays to win at the end of the game. There, you look at the first half, and after starting 7-0, Florida goes down, or Ole Miss rips off two quick touchdowns. It's 14-7. You're like, oh boy, here we go. They're heating up, and Lagway takes them down the field, and they end up scoring on a four-play, 75-yard drive with a little swing pass, like kind of like screen to Jaden Ball, where he takes 25 yards, where it was one of the most beautiful screenplays you'll ever see, where Crenshaw Dixon just does like a quick slap on the edge, gets out, hits the corner, and then even big Damian George is downfield throwing a block, and Ball goes untouched down the sideline. So, and that's just a little swing pass from Lagway. That's just a little swing pass there. So you got guys all over the field making plays. The defense responding too. But there was moments in this game where Florida took a punch to the gut and they responded. You look in the second half, Will, similar situation. Old Miss's defense, Walter Nolan was heating up. It was getting ugly, especially there at the beginning of the second half. You had a 3-and-out to start the drive. You get the fumble, great field position, 3-and-out again. Thankfully, we got a kicker in Trey Smack that can make a long field goal, puts the field goal on the board. What do we do after that? We go 3-and-out again. What do we do after that? We get one first down, but then we punt. And so you talked about the Chim DK, the big pass to DK where they get on the board. Lagway ends up hitting DK on the first play of the drive with just under 10 minutes left, or just under 10 minutes, about 9.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter here. 41-yard pass to Chim DK changed everything in that moment. Florida goes in, they finish the drive, score a touchdown, and after really struggling in the second half, you respond, you make a play when you need it, you get the job done. And that to me is the best statement about this Florida team so far. Is this wasn't like a game where everything was clicking. They had to fight, they had to battle. LSU was the same way. This team shows that it can find ways to win these types of games in the SEC. And I think that's just incredibly impressive considering where it's been at different points during the season.
Yeah, I mean, look, so Florida had 10 plays and 4 yards in the third quarter. Ole Miss had 19 plays for 102 yards,
Wow.
and they tied 3-3.
Yeah.
Like,
Says
so
everything.
if you want to know where that game was lost, if you're Ole Miss, if you're looking at it going, how did we lose that game? That's how you're looking at that's how you lost that game. Florida scored when averaging 0.4 yards per play. And the only way you do that is when you screw it up. So Ole Miss
Yeah.
screws up the punt, gives Florida
Turnover and
great field
downs.
position. Obviously, then you end up with the field goal. Turnover on downs. Now, what I will say is in the second half, and this was really reflected in the havoc numbers for Florida. So on defense, Florida, a havoc play is when the defense gets a tackle for loss, a pass deflection, or a turnover. Florida's rate for the game was 23.4%. So a quarter of the plays, Florida was creating havoc. 13% for the front seven, 10.4% for the defensive back. So it wasn't just the front seven getting the job done, even though we look at Caleb Banks and Cam Jackson and those guys and say, wow, they were really doing a good job. Ole Miss was at 25% for the year coming in terms of havoc rates. And this one, 15.9% overall, 7.9% for the front seven, 7.9% for DBs. Now, some of that's Lagway. Lagway, especially early on, did a really nice job of getting rid of the ball when he was under pressure. But a lot of that is the offensive line. A lot of that is Florida's ability to run the ball, especially in the first half. I think they were like 20 rushes for 120 yards, or yeah, 25 rushes for 120 yards. So averaged 4.8 yards per rush. Ripped off a couple of big ones there. Still, I go back and I go, Florida had three explosive plays. Ole Miss had eight. And if you'd have told me Ole Miss wins the explosive play battle 8-3, I would have said we just lost 35-10 or 35-17, like somewhere in that range. So this defense is really interesting because overall in the first half they gave up 7.2 yards per play. They gave up 10.3 yards per play or yards per pass. For the whole game they gave up 6 yards per play, which isn't great. But they had Jackson Dart down to 7.7 by the end of the game. He was seeing ghosts there in the second half. That on the field goal where Ole Miss tied it at 17, I had this in my post game article. Dart feels pressure that isn't there, gets flushed from the pocket and just throws it out of bounds. And it's like in the first half, he wasn't feeling pressure that wasn't there. He was really comfortable in the pocket. He was hitting Trey Harris down the field for the big one. But even the pass that he hit for the second touchdown to make it 14-7, it was a bullet. But he had plenty of time when he hit his back foot. He was hitching and going. He was not holding on to the ball. He wasn't patting it. He wasn't waiting. And by the time you got to the fourth quarter, there was always a hand in his face. If you go back and look at the interceptions that he threw, there was a defensive tackle's hand in his face almost every time he threw the ball. And to me, that was the thing, is that's not even a havoc play, right? That I mean, it is because you get the interception, but that's not a defensive line havoc play. But the defensive line is contributing to that. If you've got Caleb Banks with his hand in your face and you're about to get mauled by him, so you let it go early, and all of a sudden the defensive back gets it. I mean, that's just as much the defensive line as it is the defensive back. So, look, I think Florida is an interesting team in that on the offensive side of the ball, DJ Lagway makes them dangerous from anywhere on the field at any time.
Mm-hmm.
But they also go through these lulls where they just can't move the ball at all. And we've seen that in the LSU game. We've seen that in this one. Like with Graham Mertz, you very rarely saw a bunch of three and outs. But you also very rarely saw three plays, 87 yards, and a touchdown. And with Lagway, that's kind of all you get. Is you get three and outs, and you get three plays, 75 yards, and a touchdown. And the beauty of that is you end up scoring 24 points without really having to be fantastic on the offensive side of the ball. The other part is Florida had four scoring opportunities, so four times inside Ole Miss's 40-yard line, and they come up with 24 points, so 6 points per opportunity. Ole Miss had seven opportunities inside Florida's 40-yard line and only came away with 10 points. And so, you want to talk about the difference in the game. The difference in the game is that it was the ultimate bend but don't break. It's we're going to let them in there and then we're going to shut them down. Now, some of that was Ole Miss, but a lot of that was Florida's defense too. And look, who cares how you get the credit? You won the damn game, and that's what's important. I mean, all year long, I've been saying Billy Napier needs to give us wins and he needs to give us hope. Those are the two things that you need to have any sort of belief that he's going to be able to turn this around. And the wins help a lot. The win over LSU and the win over Ole Miss helps a lot. But even more than that, the hope in that DJ Lagway really has changed the offense since he's come in and made it an offense that I think we look at and say, not only is the offense already potent, but the offense has the ability to get better as he gets better. And so you combine those two things, and yeah, it's a great time to be a Florida Gator. That's for sure, man.
You mentioned hope. I know that's a message you consistently push on this. You've been pushing that ever since we've been doing this podcast here. But you talk about either have some hope or have some wins. You gotta have one of the two to keep going. And not only do we have the wins to point to here with Billy Napier, but Napier even mentioned it in his post-game press conference. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on his he really in his Billy Napier style tried not to show emotion, but you could hear the treble in his voice that he really felt this win. And this is something where he talked about how proud he was of the team and that there was some hope going forward. And, you're certainly seeing it in other areas of the program where recruiting's picking up a little bit. We'll get to that in a minute. But I think this is the hope that I have that I come out of this. I mentioned at the beginning is that this stretch here could be the turning point for the Napier era. I think one of the best comments of the offseason was from Cole Kubelik. He referred to this 5-game stretch in our schedule as perhaps people are getting logo fever. And you look at what's gone on with LSU, you look at what's gone on with FSU, and certainly Ole Miss is an awesome win. Knock them. If Ole Miss beats us, they're taking care of Mississippi State next week, and they're in the playoffs. So we played spoiler to Ole Miss. LSU still had title. They were in the SEC title mix. They were more of a long shot for the playoff, but I think that they had a long shot for the SEC title game too. But they weren't officially done. We put the final nail in both their coffins here to close out the season in the swamp, and you see this team come through, make play after play down the stretch. You see it come from all types of guys. The young guys are making plays. Montrell Johnson's high stepping in for that final touchdown as well. Bryce Thornton, a guy who's had an up and down careers, making plays in the secondary. Good tackling around the defense too in general, especially in the secondary. You notice at that second level. From what you've seen from this team, from how they turn it around, and from what you saw at Billy Napier's press conference after the game, do you think this is the point that can finally be something we can point to and say, like, okay, it's going in the right direction? Or is there a bigger picture and a bigger conversation still to be had about it?
Um, so I'm not someone who's going to come out and apologize to Billy Napier. I'm thankful that Billy Napier's winning games. I'm never going to root against my team. I think there's still some underlying stuff that is concerning in terms of everything. I think DJ Lagway covers up a lot of sins. And the cool part is that DJ Lagway wins some games when he covers up those sins. And if you can play with the Ole Misses of the world, then you can play with anybody of the world. But the game against LSU was tied going in the fourth quarter. The game against Ole Miss was tied going in the fourth quarter. The game against Georgia was tied going in the fourth quarter, and the game against Tennessee was tied going into overtime. Florida's 2-2 in those games,
Hmm.
right? And so um, there's a difference between being 7-5 and a solid team who can compete with anyone, and being 11-1 and being a playoff team. There's still a step to take. Now, look, I think there's a step that Lagway can take where it doesn't much matter what anybody around him does. But I also think there's a risk that you waste 2 years of Lagway over the next couple of years trying to get things right on the defensive side of the ball. Because for all we saw in the second half, the defense has still been inconsistent even in the second half of the year. If you look at the underlying statistics, they're making more explosive plays, they're getting more turnovers, they're getting to the quarterback more often. But when you look at the overall like yards per play type stuff, they haven't been that much better in the second half of the year or after. So if you look at like after the first bye week here, I've got the, if you look at, so overall, they've given up 5.6 yards per play. Against FBS opponents, they've given up 5.8. After the first bye, that's down to 5.5. After the second bye, though, it's 6.1. So, and you could say, well, you gotta remove Texas. That one doesn't count. Okay, well, if you do that, that's like the most generous you could do. And after the first bye, minus Texas, they're at 5.0. That's still the 40th ranked defense in the country. So, we're not talking about a top 15 defense. We're not talking about a top 10 defense. We're talking about generously a defense that's 40th and probably one that's more between 60 and 80. You're not winning a national championship with a defense that's 60 to 80. Now, you might make the playoff because I haven't gone back and historically looked at how many 2 and 3 loss teams had defenses in that range. But, and here's the positive to that, because people accuse me of being negative. I need to be positive as well. I went back and I looked at all of Lagway's stats ever since he took over in the Tennessee game after the ACL injury to Mertz. He's averaging 10.5 yards per pass. The whole offense is averaging 6.6 yards per play. That would be tied for ninth with Oregon, Louisville, and Notre Dame. So it's a top 10 offense. So you have a true freshman leading a top 10 offense. You expect that he's going to get even better. So let's say they've got a top 5 offense next year. If they can get that defense into the top 20, now you're talking about a team that can beat anyone, and not only can beat anyone, but should blow out everyone except for the elite in the SEC. So to me, this all hinges on how do you address the shortcomings that you have on the defensive side of the ball moving forward. This is the offense. Badger's leaving, DK's leaving. Yes, you have to replace those guys. But if you tell me where the money needs to be spent, the money needs to be spent on defensive linemen, linebackers, and defensive backs. Like, you need to find a way to give DJ Lagway a top 20 defense. Because if you can figure out a way to cobble together a top 20 defense, you're going to be in the playoff. And So yeah, I mean, it's like I said, if we have the 80th ranked defense again next year, we're looking at it like LSU did last year with Jaden Daniels, where Daniels won a Heisman Trophy, and you're sitting there at 10-3 going, how did that happen? Or you're looking at 2020 with Trask, where Trask is putting up video game numbers, and we're looking at 8-4, and Florida not good enough to beat Alabama in the SEC championship that year, not good enough to beat LSU in the fog game. Those are the sorts of things that you're looking at, and so hell, I'll take 8-4, right? Before the season, if you'd have told me Florida was going to go 7-5 and 8-4 the next 2 years, I would have said, oh, that's a pretty decent stretch with that schedule. But now I'm looking at it and I'm saying two things. One is that because of where the recruiting sits, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, but because of where the recruiting sits, you're not going to put an elite roster around DJ Lagway. He's going to have to raise the overall boat. And it's not that they don't have talented guys coming to Gainesville, but one of the reasons Georgia's taken a step back is because Carson Beck has not been as good as Stetson Bennett was. And we all made fun of the mailman when he was there first couple of years, but he turned into a damn good quarterback the 2 years that they won the national title. And without Bennett at quarterback, they don't win the national title. They didn't win it with Fromm, they didn't win it with Eason, and they didn't win it the first year with Bennett when he wasn't playing very well in 2020. And then in 2021, 2022, he played really, really, really well. Carson Beck hasn't played that well, and so Georgia's come back to the pack. Come back to the pack, though, is still a team that's playing for the SEC championship. And so I don't think Florida has that level of talent. I don't think if Lagway got hurt next year, God forbid, I don't think Florida's coming anywhere near playing for the SEC championship, even if they've got a hot shot recruit that they bring in who can step in. I think the reality is Lagway is going to have to raise the level of play. Same way, this is the Clemson model. It really is. Clemson got Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watson, and Trevor Lawrence back to back to back with a couple year cameo from Kelly Bryant. But that's how Dabo built the program. Now, I tend to think ACC versus SEC are different, but obviously the transfer portal wasn't around back then either. So, they're you talk, you reference that I talk about wins and I talk about hope. These wins give you line of sight to a scenario where Florida makes the playoff, where in the next 2 years Florida is a playoff team both years. And the fact that we can say that, given where we were after the Texas A&M game and even after the Texas game this year, I think is a recognition of where the program has come, and and kudos to the players for continuing to tune out the noise and continuing to play hard. And kudos to Napier for having a team that's able to do that, because that's a reflection on him. But there's some steps to take from 7-5 to even 8-4. There's some steps to take from 8-4 to 9-3. And as we're seeing, I mean, look, we just gave Ole Miss its third loss, and they're out of the playoff. So 9-3 probably isn't enough next year. You're gonna have to go 10-2 against the same schedule next year. Florida's gonna have to earn it.
So it's funny, you talk about taking steps. You hear a lot with programs where first you got to learn to be in the game. You might lose some games, and then you'll maybe try to win some close games before you take off, right? We've seen almost that progression happen this season to a point where Tennessee was that game where you go up there, you play a competitive game in Knoxville, you fall short, and then you play a competitive game with Georgia until the back half of the fourth quarter, end up falling short. Despite the injury to Lagway, you were still competitive deep into that game in the fourth quarter. Now we're seeing 2 wins. It's like you're seeing the growth week to week. It's not just talk about what's going on behind closed doors or what's going on with practice. You're actually seeing the tangible results on the field, and I think that is such a massive boost to Billy Napier. Especially when you consider, like, hey, are we positive we're hearing Austin Armstrong up for the Southern Miss job, for example? Like, are we positive there's not going to be more major changes on the coaching staff this season? So you got more changes around the road, around the corner here with the new roster size. You're going to see more activity in the transfer portal, I think. So there's going to be a lot of changes coming to the roster this season. But if you take this level of momentum late in the season into there, you show people Lagway on the field. You're not just talking about the hope of Lagway. You see it on the field. Hopefully that's like a magnet, and that brings some guys in that maybe weren't considering Florida earlier.
Well, we'll see. I mean, obviously they're saving money on a buyout, and so that money should be around. And Dave Chauncey was on Gators Breakdown a couple of weeks ago talking about the revenue sharing that's coming, and there's going to be a lot of money that's being poured into that as well. So there's opportunities for Florida to take advantage of where they sit, and that's going to be the question. And like we can get into all the existential questions about what's happening in the next few years or whatever. But the reality is that Florida has just won two games that they wouldn't have won any of the last 2 years. And that is progress. It absolutely is. There's still steps to take, and I think it's okay to say that there's still steps to take. There's steps to take in the recruiting. There's steps to take in the transfer portal. There's steps to take for DJ Lagway, because as good as Lagway is, Lagway still has some shortcomings, and as he fixes those shortcomings, boy, is he going to be exciting to watch. But one of the reasons we're excited about him is because of the potential of who he can be. So Lagway still has to take those steps. He still has to learn how to check the ball down. He has to learn how to read defenses that shift post snap. He has to stop turning the ball over as much as he has, right? Like there are steps for Lagway to take, and the exciting part is that there's potential for him to do that. But that's all it is it's potential, right? I mean,
Hopefully,
same
he'll
thing.
have two legs to make those steps with next year, and
Well,
not just one.
I'm not sure that that'll help. I think maybe maybe he doesn't ever throw on platform anyway, so I'm not sure whether
That's true.
whether that'll help. I feel like he's been more accurate the last couple of weeks with the inability to move than he was before, but I think some of that is him just settling in, right? And certainly he averaged 18.6 yards per throw against Kentucky, so so a two-legged Lagway is probably much better than what we've seen so far, but. Look, I think he has.
Two-legged leg.
I think he has an opportunity to be one of the best players put on a Gator uniform. Like I really do. Because think about what Tebow was doing the first year that he was at Florida. It was like 30 passes. He was the battering ram. They didn't really trust him to throw the ball very much. I mean, he obviously had the jump pass and then the fake run where he would back out and then throw the ball to Lewis Murphy. When the one I remember specifically is LSU just didn't cover the wide receiver because they assumed Tebow was running when he did the fake. So, I mean, Tebow was an unpolished true freshman who supplemented a team that was national championship quality. DJ Lagway is a very polished true freshman who's coming in and is raising the level of the Gator program. So, there is a world in which Lagway, and with NIL, it might even be more likely. There's a world where Lagway stays all 4 years, and Lagway's our starter for the next three, and he is just unstoppable for 3 straight years. And if that's the world we're living in, then Read and Reaction and Stand Up and Holler and all the people who follow Gator football are going to be thrilled because God, it'll be nice to talk about a quarterback who's that good and that fantastic. So
We
again, that's the excitement, right? If this was Graham Mertz and they'd beaten LSU and Ole Miss, we'd be like, okay, that's fine, but what are we doing next year? Like, is everything going to collapse? Like, we'd still have questions about Lagway. Ironically, and obviously we don't want an injury, but ironically, the injury to Mertz has freed up Billy Napier to play the guy who is the future of his program. And that future has shown so bright over the last 4 or 5 weeks when he's been in there that even the turd they laid against Texas and the turds they laid earlier in the season against Ole Miss and Miami are in the rearview mirror because they were before Lagway. I mean, it really is. It's BL and AL. It's before Lagway and after Lagway, and the team is different when he's in there. And you've got people even saying, and I mean, I think even I'm looking at it going, God, what if he'd have started against Miami? Like maybe you lose that game and maybe you get shellacked, but do you turn it around to like is he playing like he's playing now when you hit the Tennessee game? Is he playing like he's playing now when you hit the Georgia game? Like, do you have an opportunity to maybe, to be sitting in, to be in Ole Miss's spot where that game against Ole Miss was a couple 8-2 teams?
Lagway gives you so much hope that you're going and relitigating the whole season
Let's play it
now.
again, man.
Now we're
Let's play it
unbeaten.
again. Let's roll them back over. I want the Hurricanes again. And the good news is we get them again. It's the exact same season next year. So we really do
I
kind of
wonder
get to
how
answer
many
that
people that
question.
are apologizing to Billy Napier right now, if we lose to Miami next year, will not be apologizing again. That's the thing. As much as people want to say, "Oh, Billy Napier," like The seat's still pretty warm, man. The seat's going to be warm if we don't get the job done, I think. And I think you're still in the same situation next year if you come out, especially going in with expectation, especially going in seeing what we've seen. The stakes are going to raise. But you know what? You don't come to Florida for lowered expectations, and you don't come to Florida to not be on that seat. You come to Florida to be in that spot, to be competing with expectations that you're going to be a playoff team. And so I would guarantee a guy like Napier welcomes that challenge and is perfectly fine with having only what, an $18 million buyout. I haven't checked the number for next year, but I'm sure it's amazing. I'm sure it's incredible. So that's the best bet ever. You go in, if you lose, here's a ton of money. It's an awesome bet that I need to figure out how to do that, get some of that going in
What
my
you mean
world
your
too,
job
man.
doesn't have a
I
buyout if
don't
they
have a
fire you?
$26 million buyout. I don't have a $26 million
Like,
dollar
go
buyout.
in and tell him you'd settle
It's
for
the
two.
best bet ever. Like, I mean, Billy Napier's gonna be okay. Billy Napier's winning either way. He's gonna win either way. But I really am like, I have my doubts too about Billy Napier, and like we've expressed them plenty on this program. But like watching him in that interview, I've said this all along too. He's an easy person to root for. Billy Napier, the person, is a good man that is very easy to root for. And hey, we have qualms with the winning and losing part of the equation. We get the job done, and we're getting the wins. Like he's going to be an easy guy to get behind and root for too. So I think that this is something that you could tell that moment really he really was enjoying the moment. And so like I was happy to see that for him and the guys in the program who are really in that, like we talked about last week. We picked that Florida versus the world cover. We picked that as our statement for the cover because we knew what the noise was coming into the season. We had the board of Haterade and the whole ecosystem, Gator ecosystem has echoed this, including us. I've put us in the mix too, Will, of the doubts along the way. And they were proven. We were just echoing what we saw on the field. We were just going off of what we saw on the field. But I don't know if I've seen a Florida team really flip the switch to this degree in a season. I mean, this is you're just at two completely different spots from the beginning of the season to the end. And we head into Florida State this week up in Tallahassee with a chance to really close out on a strong note and for a young team get a bunch of bowl practices, which by the way, we're going bowling either way, win or lose against Florida State. That 6-win mark with Ole Miss makes Florida bowl eligible. And at the beginning of the season, that looked like a tall task in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, look, the over/under in Vegas was 4.5.
Yeah.
So, from an exceeding expectations perspective in terms of what Vegas expected, and that was always the issue. The issue wasn't that Napier couldn't exceed expectations from a Vegas perspective. It was that when you're in year three, your expectations need to be higher than winning 5 games. And so I am excited about the program and I'm excited about where it can go because of DJ Lagway, but I'm also very realistic about it in terms of there are still some warts in different places. And you even saw it in this one where there was like a minute 10 left with a timeout. Napier had called a timeout to get Ole Miss to punt the ball back to him. And then they decided to really do some weird stuff as they ran out the clock there in the first half to a point where it almost looked like they were going to have to give the ball back to Ole Miss. And I'm sitting there going, you're a 5-5 team. You shouldn't have anything to
Let it
lose.
rip,
You've got
Billy.
you've got your best player who saved your job as the quarterback. And here's the thing that I get, I guess that I look at as a wasted opportunity is next year or the year after, DJ Lagway is going to trot out onto the field with a minute 10 and a timeout. And he's going to need to drive them for a touchdown or need to drive them for a
To win
field
the game.
goal.
All right.
And you have an opportunity to rep that in an SEC game against an elite defense and see what he can do. And maybe he fails. Maybe he throws a pick six. Maybe it goes the other direction. And in Napier's world, a pick six there and a loss probably starts a whole lot of noise in the other direction. But I would have defended him at that point because I look at it and I go, that's a missed opportunity to have your special player learn. And why are we out here at 5-5 unless we're going to allow our special players to learn so that when they're in that situation, and you see this all the time, like Steph Curry shoots thousands of free throws so that when he gets up there and he's tired and he's got this weird crazy regimen where they like run him ragged until he's exhausted and then he goes and shoots free throws. And the whole point is that when he gets in a game and he's exhausted at the end of a long NBA season, he can still knock down those free throws. And to me,
Mhm.
this was an opportunity for Lagway to practice free throws. This was an opportunity where in a game where there's nerves, where it means something, and you've got a minute 10 or a minute 13 or whatever it is and one timeout. Instead, we run a stretch play, we run a second stretch play, run another stretch play to get the first down, then take a shotgun snap and clock it, then run another stretch
That
play.
was the
It's
weird
like,
part to me. It's like I like because again we wrote about this in the magazine. The middle eight article that I wrote talked about the logic behind that is keep you know it might be frustrating as a fan to watch, but you're keeping the ball out of the hands of an offense that can really be explosive in Ole Miss, and you take it to the locker room as frustrating as that is. But then you get the first out and you clock the ball and you run it again. Are you going for it or not? Like I'm very confused. That was the part that confused me at
well,
the end of
and
the
even
first
then,
half.
we know it's not without risk because they had a 3rd and 15 a couple of weeks ago against Texas, and they hand the ball off to Jacoby Jackson with a draw, and
100%.
he fumbles the ball, and all of a sudden Texas is in business.
Yeah.
Now that didn't happen here. Florida gets out of the half. It's not like a giant
But are you
disaster.
going for it or not? And that's the
Wow.
part. If you want to go to the locker room, go to the locker room and do it safely, or just do
Well,
the middle thing that you're doing. I don't
and
understand that.
you have a Maserati, take it out of the garage. Like I've never understood the folks who buy the car and don't take it out of the garage. And I'm sure somebody get mad at me because I don't collect cars. But it's like in some capacity, you spent the time and energy and effort and money and whatever it took to get the Maserati. Drive the damn thing. And I'm sitting there with a minute to left in the half, drive your Maserati, see what DJ can do. And even if he throws a pick six, even if it's a disaster, even if you turn the ball right back over to Ole Miss and they come down and get a field goal or a touchdown or whatever it is, and maybe the whole dynamic of the game changes then. I still think that there's value in failure with a we all see this. Like the value is like and we even see this year with Florida. These last two wins are significant because of the way they lost some of the games earlier in the year. And, if Florida had ripped off a bunch of wins to start the year, the win against LSU would have been expected. The reason the win against LSU is a big deal, the reason the win against Ole Miss is a big deal is because of how they looked earlier this year. You talked about development. This team has learned in some capacity how to win. Now, how much is that from a development perspective carries over to next year and all those sorts of things are open questions. But yeah, I mean, so again, I'm nitpicking obviously because Florida won the damn game. At the same time, is that really what we're trying to do? And that's maybe a bigger existential question, which is what, like, I want the Maserati to run full bore next year against Georgia when you get the ball back with a minute 45 and a tie ball game, or a minute 45 and you're down by one. And you need to get yourself into field goal range and you need to manage your timeouts and manage the first downs and not take a sack and not and dink and dunk because they're giving you a zone because they're playing prevent. Like, let's do that now so you're ready. And I'm really fearful, Nick. I'm really fearful that I'm going to refer back to that moment next year. That
I,
there's going to be a point where I go, ugh, like we, when we screw up a clock management situation again, or whatever goes on. Like I hope not, but I can see a place where that might be true.
well, luckily with clock management before the half, you have plenty of choices to choose from. You don't have to choose just the Ole Miss game. Will you'll have plenty? There's plenty of options.
I will
So
not blame Lagway, that is for sure.
you mentioned Lagway as the Maserati. If Graham Mertz doesn't get injured, the Maserati's playing once every three drives still, and so that's another key part to this season. And like the one thing with Mertz, and they highlighted this on the broadcast, it was senior day, so just quick shout out for Mertz. Like we see a situation like Boston College, Castellanos gets benched, the quarterback at Boston College. He's off the team. He walks away from the roster. We've seen countless players in college football just quit on the season and leave. Like Graham Mertz has not only stuck around, but to be a mentor for the guy that replaced you. Like I've said this with Mertz, I see this in him. he's either going to be he could either be a heck of a broadcaster if he wanted to be, or a heck of a coach. I think he's got that personality and mentality and makeup to where he seems like that type of guy that could really do a great job with one of those. And the fact that he has stuck around, I do believe that's been a positive impact on Lagway. So, like, I really want to give some credit to Mertz there. But with one thing, if you're Billy Napier and when you do the post mortem on this season, one thing I hope Billy Napier looks at is like look at all these young guys making plays across the field. I mean, even like a Jaden Ball, right? Like has been a huge player, but you got 70% they said tied up in NIL for freshman and sophomore class, the freshman and sophomore class. You almost were too conservative. You almost were so conservative that you lost this job. And really you kind of in some ways lucked your way into the situation. So some things went your way to where you had to rely on the Maserati on some of these big pieces, and they are coming through, and you get the credit for that because you recruited them and they're there, but you didn't trust that out the gate. And like you said, you go back and you look at this team. Now, do I think all these guys will be playing at this level against Miami? Absolutely not. I think they've developed. I think it's, we're also in game 11 of the regular season. So they've had a full season to develop and really see some things come at them full speed at the college level. But maybe you lower the threshold for what it needs to be for a young guy with a ton of talent to get on the field. Maybe he's going to blow an assignment. Maybe he's going to screw up. But if he is that much more talented and it's going to be that big of a difference on the positive side, eat a couple negative plays. I think that's what I hope really Billy Napier looks at the season and gets that lesson out of it.
I mean, that's the criticism with the minute and 10 left in the first half is that, yes, you might fail, but failure in that situation, one, doesn't impact your job status because you've already been guaranteed the 2025 season. But all it can do is help DJ Lagway be better next year. And look, in terms of Graham Mertz, a Volvo is a fine car. A Volvo keeps you safe. If you got a family, you
Good
want to
car for
drive a
kids, man.
Volvo. But you don't win the NASCAR race. You don't win the Daytona 500 in a Volvo or a Lexus or whatever car you want to use as the analogy. And look, if you slid Graham Mertz and his ability into Georgia's roster, I think Georgia's like way better than they've been with Carson Beck this year. So I am impressed with the ability. Other than the Miami game, I've been very impressed with Mertz's career at Florida. But the recognition was always there that we don't have Georgia's roster around him. And so we're not winning the NASCAR race. And that's the thing with Lagway, and that's the thing that gives me hope heading into next year is the team around him may not be ideal. And even the coach who's coaching the team may not be ideal. But he can win the NASCAR race, right? He's capable of doing that all by himself. Now he's going to need some help along the way. And certainly, the guy's a gunslinger. And so there's some places where he needs to improve as well. And maybe he can't win that race all by himself. And maybe we're looking up a year or two from now saying, man, we just couldn't get it done. But there's a potential to do that. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one of those things where, the every three plays, you and I thought that was ridiculous right when it started. It's like either play the hot hand if you're going to switch them back and forth, or choose one.
Right.
And the idea, like, I don't believe that DJ Lagway is playing better now because he got a couple of drives because he got on the field with 30 seconds left in the first half against Texas A&M.
Right.
Like,
Think about how many wasted drives there were, right? Yeah.
well, and the other part is that, and we talked about this early in the year, that when you had Tebow and Leak, the Venn diagram of those two was very separate. That Tebow provided something Leak could not, and Leak provided something that Tebow at that point could not. This year, the Venn diagram is really there's quite a bit of overlap between Lagway and Mertz, and the explosion that you get out of Lagway that was pretty apparent early on. That explosion that you get out of Lagway offsets the interceptions and offsets the three and outs. And again, to your point, I mean, we saw the same thing with Trace Mack, right? I mean, you had Adam Mahalik out there kicking kicks when it was pretty clear Trace Mack was the best guy for the job, and there have been other times along the way. Now, look, I mean, I think at the same time, Florida's won two straight, and they should win three straight. And then hopefully they're playing in the Gasparilla Bowl because that'll be in Tampa and I'll be there that weekend. And so hopefully they win four straight. And if they end up 8-5 to end this year and come out and, I mean, you talked about what happens if they lose to Miami, but what happens if they go out and beat Miami by 45, right? Go down to Coral Gables and just whip them. Like all of a sudden now,
Won't have Mario pounded on the podium talking about best program in the state. That's what.
the tone and the tenor and all that sort of stuff will change. You'll have Mario pounded on the podium saying, "Well, they bought that team." It's like, some sort of all the stuff people were saying about Sigs there at Indiana this year. So, look, I think it's okay to be hesitant, mainly because the openers for the last 2 years have just wounded me deeply, and we still have to see it consistently game after game. And what 6-5 says to me is that we have the ability to run with the big dogs. We have not shown the ability to run with the big dogs week after week after week. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing in the SEC right now is that it's really hard to run with the big dogs week after week after week. I mean, you had Alabama playing Oklahoma last week. That would have been the Citadel a couple of years ago, or it would have been Vanderbilt, or it would have been South Carolina or something like that. Now it's Oklahoma. And even though Oklahoma is also 6-5 after that win, Oklahoma is a solid football team. Florida is a solid football team.
What a
Um,
shocking game that was, by the
Even
way.
Auburn, right? I
Alabama,
mean,
just
well,
Oklahoma's taking it to Alabama. That was unbelievable.
yeah, I mean, so the SEC is weird like that in that you got to get up week after week after week. I'll tell you, the most impressive thing that I think about this stretch is that Florida coming off a bye week and Georgia coming off a bye week play a really close game. Florida gets decimated by injuries and goes and just gets absolutely obliterated by Texas. Then they come and play an LSU team and get the win, but still with a pretty depleted roster, even and Lagway himself being less than 100%. And then Ole Miss comes in off a bye week. So yeah, Trey Harris gets injured during the
And,
game.
and a win over Georgia, too.
Yeah, well, so
Peking.
I'm so I mean again, I sort of look at it and I go the ability of the team to emotionally get up every week has been impressive. And that's actually going to be, I think, a test for the team this week. I don't think physically they're a worse team than I don't think there's any doubt they're way better than Florida State physically. I don't think there's any doubt that they're just, from where the programs sit, that Florida is in a better spot than the Noles, especially this year. I think it's going to be a question of emotion, right? This is an opportunity for Florida State to sort of flex in a way against the guys they've played, against the guys they've grown up against. Those rivalry games are always pretty intense. And if Florida is resting on its laurels after the last two wins, this one could get kind of hairy, especially since it's on the road. But man, this Florida State team is awful.
They're bad, dude. They're bad. It's been a two-win season in Tallahassee, Will. We've never seen anything like it in our lifetimes. There's a couple of bad years for Florida State football, too, while they were transitioning from Bowden and figuring themselves out. There's been a couple bad losses for Florida State, but never a bad like two-win season. I mean, we haven't even seen it be this bad in Gainesville at any point through some of our rough stretches in the last decade. But really, you look at this Florida State team this year. You went from we talked about, if you go back, you could pull up some episodes from 2023 where we talked about this is a team that's all in on 2023. There's a huge their reliance on the portal. They're leaning heavily on the portal. And when you hit on it, you find guys like Keon Coleman coming in. You find guys like Fisk or Jermaine Johnson or Jared Verse. Like, you're going to have some success with guys like that. But if you miss the way we've seen this year consistently across the board, um, that's not going to get it done, especially when your recruiting is not up to par. When your recruiting is not up to par to be an elite program and you can't fall back on it. So if you don't hit on the portal, you don't have that recruiting class to fall back on. That's how this happens so fast here in just 1 year, where you go from 13-1 to 2-9 pretty quickly. But you look at the offense, Will, FSU across the board, that's been the more shocking part for me, even with Mike Norvell. I thought if you watch Jordan Travis earlier in his career at Florida State, I never like I don't think a lot of people saw him developing into the quarterback that he eventually became. I thought that was a hell of a job by Mike Norvell, and I looked at Norvell differently after seeing the way he developed Travis. So for to go out and to get a guy like DJU to come in, and though he's had his moments in his career, he had a decent season at Oregon State. So you're thinking he's stepping in with a better roster at FSU than what he played with at Oregon State. Even if he just was the guy he was at Oregon State, this is going to be a good football team. And the schedule they play, they don't have crazy challenges on the schedule like you see on an SEC schedule. They should be able to walk through the ACC. And yeah, Clemson's tough, and there's a couple other tough games in there. It shouldn't be that bad for FSU, though. Nope. Nope. That's not what we saw at all this year from game one. They dropped the ball against Georgia Tech. And really, once Boston College walked into Tallahassee and smoked them, all the red flags were up and it just never recovered. It just never recovered. Somehow they beat a pretty good Cal team. Cal's not a bad football team. They end up beating them. But the defense has been up and down. There's some talent on this defense. They have not been performing week to week. And the offense flat out just does not do anything close to keeping pace to win some football games for this team, Will. So you're getting a Florida State team that is absolutely the worst football team of our lifetime in Tallahassee. This should be a beatdown in Tallahassee on Saturday if things are going good for Billy Napier and the Gators.
Yeah, so I mean, look, Florida State is 133rd in the country in yards per play on offense, so next to last in all of FBS. They're averaging 4.0 yards per play. To put that in perspective, Florida with Aiden Warner in the second half, or I guess the last three quarters of Georgia and the whole game against Texas, was averaging 3.93 yards per play. So Florida State's entire offense this year against some defenses that aren't great is looking the same as Florida's third string quarterback against Georgia and Texas. So that's the equivalent of the offensive performance that Florida State's putting up. And look, I mean, if you'd have told Florida State fans that they were going to be down to Luke Kromenhoek as the starting quarterback against the Gators, that Uiagalelei would have sucked, that Glenn would have sucked, and that Kromenhoek is now taking over. And I mean, that guy didn't even start at quarterback until like late in his junior year or his senior year of high school. If you'd have told them that, it would have been the same thing if you'd have told us that Aiden Warner was starting the rest of the year, right? If Aiden Warner had started the LSU and the Ole Miss games because Lagway was more injured if he was as injured as he appeared when they carted him off in the Georgia game, we're having a completely different conversation about the Florida program, where it sits, all that sort of stuff, right? And so Florida State has that third string quarterback, but the other part is what you mentioned. So if you look at the guys who got drafted last year for Florida State, there's 10 guys. Jared Verse, Keon Coleman, Braden Fisk, Renardo Green, Trey Benson, Jarian Jones, Jordan Travis, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, Tatum Bethune. So Travis is the only guy who transferred in and wasn't a transfer for Norvell. And then Renardo Green is the only guy who they actually recruited. Everybody else was a transfer portal addition for Norvell. So Jordan Travis, like you mentioned, turned into a very, very good player, maybe even an elite player. And the thing I'll say is flags fly forever. So if Travis hadn't gotten injured, that team's in the playoff last year. And who knows what happens at that point? I still think they get spanked in the first round. But you have a little bit of different taste in your mouth than Travis getting injured, getting left out, and then getting absolutely boat raced by Georgia. And I've sort of made the joke a few times this year that Georgia broke their program, but in some ways they did. And look, I think that's a huge talent drain. 10 guys going to the NFL. But the bigger part of that is that we talk all the time about recruiting and stacking recruits. And that the reason you want to stack recruits and the reason you want these high star guys is because they turn out a lot. And the transfer portal has not been like that. So the fact that Norvell was able to hit on all those guys in the transfer portal is an anomaly. And so to continue to rely on that is fool's gold. You will eventually get burned. And honestly, that's actually kind of my concern with Florida's program is they got two years of DJ Lagway now, and the prevailing wisdom is they're going to go raid the portal to build the support around Lagway. And you can absolutely envision a scenario where a couple of years ago, or a couple of years from now, DJ Lagway leaves, you get a bunch of guys drafted, and who's there to support. Now, Napier's done a better job of recruiting than Norvell, and that's actually the kiss of death for Norvell isn't that he's missing the transfer portal. The kiss of death for Norvell is they went 13-1 and their recruiting didn't get any better. And so the thing to watch for Billy Napier is not the number of players he brings in, and it's not that they're not at 50th anymore. The reason they were at 50th in the recruiting rankings is because they just didn't have many guys in the class. So they haven't brought in guys who are even. In fact, they brought in on average guys who are a lower quality than they had when they were ranked 51st. What's happened is that they've just got more guys in the class. They're sitting there like 89.8, I think, and overall they're rating in that 24/7 class now. So if Napier can't turn this recruiting class into something where he gets some elite top end talent, so they need to flip Jamie French, or they need to flip Solomon Thomas, or they need to flip Dallas Wilson. Like they need to add that 5-star elite talent in there because if he can't turn the DJ Lagway and the narrative of everything is turning and the vote of confidence, if he can't turn all that into success in the recruiting trail, then you're in the exact same place that Florida State is right now the minute DJ Lagway goes out the door. So that's what's happened at Florida State. I mean, what happened is that they built a house on sand and said, when the waves come in, we're going to rebuild a house. But the problem is the waves have come in a few times in the middle of the season and they don't have the infrastructure to be able to navigate all that stuff. And honestly, I'm not sure that Florida State has the NIL to be able to navigate that either. I think they spent a lot of their money last year on the guys they brought in. And so what's left now? And
Well, and Will, as
they got to
part of
save up for
that,
their buyout.
I know when we're getting our doors blown off at the beginning of the year and there's talk about culture and great practices and everything behind the scenes and people when you're losing, you start to roll your eyes at that stuff. Even though
Including me.
anyone who's worked at in a team knows that culture does matter, but it's just tough to hear over and over again when you're getting your doors blown off. But you look at that and there's been a different approach to building a roster. What type of culture do you have when you're relying on that portal and you're bringing in guys that haven't played with each other? Maybe they don't mesh. Maybe there's personalities that aren't clicking. You saw big changes on the coaching staff here with Florida State, and maybe that's in response to some of the recruiting efforts as well. Some of those guys not getting the job done on the recruiting trail to the degree that you should at Florida State. I,
Here's what I'll
there's
say:
the
Florida.
approach to for it's just one thing. If it does go in the right direction here with Billy Napier, though the criticism of doing the slow build in the NIL era, I think is accurate. Either way, it's accurate. We are seeing the benefits of a good culture pay off to where you got a team that's 500, one game above 500, playing their tail off with a bunch of young guys versus a team that seems to have quit at midseason here in Tallahassee.
Well, so Florida's culture was a complete non-factor until DJ Lagway was the quarterback. And Florida State's culture was not a problem until Jordan Travis left.
Mhm.
And so, in some ways, when you have a leader who is able to paper over your warts, you don't get people who start pointing at each other, and you don't get people who check out and all those sorts of things. Now, look, I think Lagway, from everything that we hear, Lagway is a big part of that culture, right? He's a big part of the leadership within the team, even as a true freshman. And he just carries himself differently and sort of raises the level of the team. And so, if Lagway's bought into Billy Napier and Strickland's bought into Billy Napier, the team is going to follow as long as Lagway's out there playing well. And so what you're seeing, I think, at Florida State is Uiagalelei has
Right. That's not a
zero.
guy that came up under
Yeah.
Norvell. He's not a Seminole. Like there's no ties to Tallahassee
Yeah, I mean, he'll probably
either
go back to like
one.
an Oregon State reunion a few years from now, just because, he spent time there. And that's one of the unfortunate parts of
Did you
college football.
see
But
Princely UMass try to have a reunion with the fans at what, gate 18? Or
yeah, I
there's
am
a
curious about the protocols. Like, do we have the players walk from gate 18 amongst the fans in uniform, like to
in
the bus?
uniform.
Like what's going on here? It's like he was like headed out to a frat party or something after the game. He was going to change when he got to his old frat house. I don't know what's going on, man. Never a dull moment with Princely, man. Definitely never a dull moment. Came in with a ski mask and the Ole Miss
Boy, he's
pullover
he's
and all
just
that
got to
sort of
lay
stuff.
off the pregame. he just does. That's not one of the strengths of his game. His pregame trash talk is not doesn't follow it up very well. But let's go back to Florida State. Lawrence Toafili here, their leading rusher, 100 carries on the season here, Will, for 413 yards. Just to put that in perspective, Jaden Baugh, 108 carries for 522, Montrell, 90 carries for 494, and Jacoby Jackson, 73 carries for 401 yards. So you got three rushers on the Florida team over 400 yards on the season. The next leading rusher on Florida State is Cam Davis, freshman. He has 47 carries for 170 yards. So that really highlights the lack of production in the Mike Norvell system this year. It's really just been there's really no bright spots on this offense. So you look at the challenges this defense has faced the last couple weeks. Uh, this is nothing like what we've seen over the last month of the season.
No, I'll tell you, it's interesting. So they have 328 rushing attempts all year long, and 114 have come from their quarterbacks. Brock Glenn has 35 rushes for 97 yards, so he's averaging 2.8 yards per rush. Croman Hoke has 42 rushes for 81 yards, so he's averaging
And,
1.9
and
yard per
42
rush.
of those yards were on one carry, by the way.
And Uiagalele, 37 rushes, minus 8 yards, so negative 0.2. So there's a lot of sacks in there
Hmm.
in those rushing numbers. And so you think about Florida's defense, what they've been able to do with Banks and Jackson and Pyburn and Kelby Collins and all those guys who Searcy and Gums and those guys. They should spend an awful lot of time in the backfield making Croman Hope's day really, really bad. And Florida State overall for the year, 133rd in yards per rush. They're averaging 2.7 yards per rush. They're not much better through the air, 127th, so 5.9 yards per rush. Um, Florida, the defense is FSU's actually ranked 80th overall. Florida's ranked 74th. I think you could say that Florida's taken a step forward since the beginning of the year, so probably a little bit better than that. But honestly, from a defensive perspective, these two teams, like if Florida State had any semblance of an offense, I'd go, this is a relatively even game. But Florida State's offense is so bad. And Florida's offense with DJ Lagway in there is a top 10 offense. The only way this one should be close is if for some reason the hamstring acts up. And I hope not, knock on wood, but that's really Florida State's only hope is that they get Aiden Warner for some amount of this game. But I think it's much more likely that Aiden Warner's in there when Florida's up 50.
Yeah, even still, even if with Aiden Warder, I think Florida would have a shot. I think it's that ugly right now with Florida State. So I almost hate being this confident going into this game because it's like it's a rivalry game. Even the years where Florida was great, those were some tough games. I know that 2008 game, Florida blew them out. There's a couple times where Florida blew them out, but there were some battles in there. That '06 game was a battle, especially when you go up to Tallahassee. It's typically a battle, but um, yeah, let's close it out on the right way. Let's hope we see them close it out on the right way here, Will.
Yeah,
Let's
man,
get
I am a little bit worried because I wasn't this confident against Mississippi State or UCF.
yeah.
So the last 2 weeks have made me a little bit more sanguine about what's going on, and hopefully that's not going to come back to bite me. But
Yeah. Quite
Indiana's still in the college football playoff, man. So there's hope
Well,
for anybody is
we'll
really
get
what
there
that says.
next, but I first want to talk about the fact that it's been a nice week on the recruiting trail. I had a couple, we're not going to get into the super detail, but I had a couple players flip from the Florida State class specifically here, highlighted by Byron Louis from American Heritage running back, three-star FSU flip. Yeah, a wide receiver that flipped from Arizona, a tackle that flipped from Cincinnati, Ty Jackson, though, linebacker 21st ranked linebacker in the class. He's a USC flip, and that's from the 24/7 4-star on 24/7. So Ty Jackson, the highlight of the week, in my opinion. Another good young linebacker coming in with this class.
Yeah, look, he's 124th overall. Certainly, when you see Aaron Childs and you see Miles Graham playing out there early, there's an opportunity. Loxahatchee, Florida, so a local kid being able to bring in guys in that circle that we talk about, a big deal. 94.37 for his 24/7 rating raises Florida's overall 24/7 rating. Lou, Brian Louis, running back 231 overall. Again, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so still from the state. 91.68. Again, sort of raises that. Tramel Jones, the quarterback who came in recently, flipped out of Jacksonville. Again, important in that range. 91.52. Those are the guys you look at and say, okay, um, you know, those are the guys who are going to probably have to pop in order for us to say this is a successful class. Guy like Stephon Shivers on the defensive line, 493rd overall. I think we talked a little bit last week. He's the guy that they line up at Brentwood Academy as a running back. And it just looks ridiculous when he's out there. And then
Maybe that's
Jahari
where
Med
Lane Kiffin got the idea from.
and then Jahari Medlock, an offensive tackle, 743rd overall, 87.44. And Moise Sankera, 838, so 87.14. Those guys have actually sort of decreased the quality of player that Florida's brought in terms of the overall player rating. But in terms of where they sit on the 24/7 rankings, they're now at 17th overall with 19 commits. 89.69 is their ranking. That's a far cry from the Georgias at 93.27, Alabama 93.19, Ohio State 92.77, Texas 92.81, even Auburn 92.07, LSU 92.11, Tennessee 91.13, Oregon 93.74, Michigan 92.14. That's your top 9. Miami's at 91.02 and A&M's at 91.32. Those might be reachable, but I don't think so. Notre Dame's 90.48 and Oklahoma's 91.11. You're getting to the 13th or 14th spot when you start naming off those teams. Penn State's 89.81, so similar to Florida. Ole Miss 90.02, similar to Florida. That's kind of who Florida's competing with. Maybe they jump up in front of Oklahoma. Maybe they jump up in front of Notre Dame. But the best you're probably looking at this class without some elite guys committing, without like multiple guys out of the Solomon Thomas, Dallas Wilson, Jamie French ilk, those five-star guys, the most you're seeing Florida finish up is probably 13th or 14th, and they might even be like in the 15th or 16th range. Which, considering where the class was a while back, they have closed pretty well to get these guys coming in. But this is still not the type of class that you would look at and say, yeah, that makes you an instant contender in the SEC. And that's just the reality. So they're going to have to go supplement with a portal, and they're going to have to get these guys developed and quickly in there. And they're going to have some 3 stars hit. I mean, that's just sort of the reality. Is if they want to be a championship team, they're going to need depth, and some of these guys are going to have to hit.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure plenty of more action here in the next couple of weeks as we march ever closer to signing day. One big flip we did see nationally, I think is worth mentioning here, is Bryce Underwood, the quarterback that's been committed to LSU. He's the number 1 quarterback in the class out of Michigan. Spurned the hometown Wolverines to go down to play for Brian Kelly. Another loss for Brian Kelly here in the month of November. Will, it's been a rough month for that guy. Michigan just comes in with apparently a Godfather offer that involves Dave Portnoy, Larry Ellison from Oracle here. Uh, apparently stepped in and they bought Michigan a pretty fine quarterback from what the story is out there on Barstool.
I mean, if you were looking at Florida, wouldn't you say that if the number 1 recruit in the country is a quarterback, that maybe it's worth bringing that guy in?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in terms of
You
like,
could just watch Michigan this year and say the same thing.
well, I mean, I guess I'm sitting here going, if I'm a head coach, the first thing I'm doing is I'm saying when I like if I get hired at somebody comes in and says, Will, you're going to take over the I don't know who's struggling this year. You're going to take over the Purdue program, whatever. The first thing I do is I get all my boosters together and I go, I don't care who else is on the team. Who's the best quarterback out there? I need a Godfather offer for that guy. And then I'm selling him on come to Purdue and turn it around and you'll be a god. Maybe Purdue's a terrible example, but whatever that program is. I mean, if I'm Lincoln Riley, that's the thing I'm doing is I gotta find the guy. And when I find the guy, then we start building around him. And so I think Michigan found the guy, and thankfully LSU lost the guy because Florida plays LSU every year. And it's fun to play Garrett Nussmeier. It's not fun to play Jaden Daniels. And so,
Fun to play game.
I mean, look, we're 1-0 against
We
Nussmeier,
are going to LSU next year.
and
We
we
are
gave
going
up
to LSU.
11 touchdowns the last 2 years to Jaden Daniels. And so, Whether Underwood can turn into who Daniels was, I have no idea. But I know that Nussmeier won't turn into Jaden Daniels, and so And Walker Howard left for Ole Miss last year, who was their other five-star recruit, who was in there at some point along the way too. So the cupboard's getting kind of bare there at the quarterback position for LSU, and it'll be nice to see them go through some of those struggles, and maybe Florida can put them. Maybe we can tick them. We always at the preseason we always put win, loss, and toss for the different games. Hopefully next year we can put that in the W category for Ole Miss and Brian Kelly, and he can keep dancing with his recruits. But when it comes time to beat in Florida, we can start putting a streak together.
And I meant to mention this with Ty Jackson, but how many recruits in the Southeast has USC seen flip to Southeastern schools this year? USC was on a roll last summer, and they've lost Ty Jackson now, Stubbs. I can think of several others in Georgia alone. Florida and
Uh,
Georgia, they're just on a roll with losing guys to the
It's
Southeast. They're not going to come back to the Southeast for a while, I think.
it's funny. I think the general rules. You know how that NIL is starting to level out. It's because we are seeing guys from Florida stay in the state of Florida or stay in the Southeast. It's because we're seeing guys in California stay in California. That's how NIL is starting to even out. Now, look, in the top 15, 20, 25 guys, you're probably going to see a lot more distance because those guys are going to get offers that that are ridiculous and life-changing. And so they're going to take those. But when I think about guys rated like 80th to 800, like I think the money's going to be kind of equivalent from multiple programs. And so what are they going to choose on? They're going to choose on all the things everybody used to choose on. They're going to choose on, well, how close is it for my parents to get there and my friends and where are my friends going and where are my high school teammates playing and can I get them to take my high school teammate even though he might not have been a take because they want me to come and all those sorts of things I think start to become a bigger consideration as the money becomes equivalent. Now, for years, there has been a there has been a disconnect between different programs. Some programs have just gone out there. I mean, A&M a few years ago when they had the number one class went out there, and even Nick Saban was like, "Well, they bought that class," and they're sitting there going, "So those are the rules." Like, and A&M was able to take advantage and find an edge and really out recruit Alabama. And then Nick Saban called out his boosters, and all of a sudden Alabama was back up top. You're still going to, I mean, there's always been a stratification in terms of recruiting, but I think what you're going to see is that it's kind of returning back to normal in some capacity. And maybe that'll change again with the settlement with the NCAA. Maybe that'll change as these players move more into an employee status over the next few years. There's always sort of constant change, but it does feel like to me that things are coming back a little bit more to normal where there's at least a handle on like what the 250th ranked player in the country should be worth, right? That people are getting a handle on that, which means the offer to that kid are pretty even, right? And if USC really wants him, maybe they bump it up a little bit. But they're not going to sit there and do the Rashada thing where, hey, we're gonna bid some kid up who's ranked 60th or 80th overall to a number that's equivalent to the number one recruit in the country. Like I think the days of that are over. And so what that means is I think recruiting becomes more regional again. I think all the other things you used to consider, like you know, Florida used to bring every time Bill Sykes used to warn me about this. Every time Florida brought a kid over from California, he was immediately back on the West Coast like a year or two later. This was even before you had free transfers, even when you had like to sit out a year. They had Josh Shaw come over at
Chris
one point
Steele,
from California. They had Chris
right?
Steele come over from
Yeah.
California. And those guys were always back over in that direction after about a year. And I think that's what you're going to see here too. So what
And
I
we have
will
a Trojan on the roster that came back from USC, Zandabella, right?
Well, so what I will say is that really does mean that drawing a circle around your state becomes very important because if you think about the portal, in many ways the portal is I'm not happy with my playing time and I get some ancillary benefits someplace else. If the money is equivalent, why leave your home state? But if you're going to USC and your parents live in Lakeland, right? Like, and you're not happy with your playing time, you're not happy with something there, and the money's equivalent, well, sure, transfer right back. So I, I'll be interested to see how that works moving forward with the portal. I think there will be a lot of movement in the portal, but I think the high school recruiting is going to start to settle down to return not completely, but a little bit more like it has been historically from a regional perspective.
All right, let's do quickly SEC championship with all the chaos. Alabama going down, Ole Miss going down. Tennessee's kind of out of it. We said they were a long shot anyway last week. It's very simple this week. Georgia's in, the winner of Texas and Texas A&M on Saturday night. The prices at Kyle Field are outrageous. Absolutely, by far the game of the week, potentially the game of the season here in College Station as Texas and Texas A&M renew the rivalry. Obviously, A&M coming off of a terrible disappointment at Auburn, but they battled, man. They got back in. They probably should have made that catch in overtime to tie it up. And hey, it's a tough Aggies team. So I'm not used to thinking about A&M being the team that comes out on top in a lot of big games that actually matter. So I'm leaning Texas in this one, but it wouldn't shock me to see A&M to get it done in this one.
Well, so the question I have is how much influence does Greg Sankey have on the officials? Because if you're the SEC, do you want Texas and Georgia in the championship? Or do you want A&M and Georgia in the championship with Texas dropping down after a loss to A&M but still in the playoff picture? And then if A&M loses in the SEC championship, that probably frees up a spot for either Tennessee or Alabama to jump back into the playoff. I think a bunch of these SEC teams are sort of jockeying for those bottom spots in the playoff now because of the way the losses happened this weekend. And so I'm really interested to see sort of we'll see if it's if it's 13 penalties for 125 yards against Texas. Oh, look, they busted an 80-yard run and there's a holding penalty. Or maybe it's the opposite where they really want Texas Georgia as the championship game, and both of those teams will be in no matter what happens. And then you hope that something happens to Indiana or Penn State or Notre Dame or SMU along the way, and frees up a spot for Alabama to jump in there.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Sankey's Indiana slander worked because despite the Hoosiers losing at Ohio State, they're still in the playoff here at number 11. The rankings, we're doing this recording late on Tuesday night, and the rankings are out. Oregon number one, Texas number two, Miami number three, Boise State number four. Again, for those of you who don't follow this and they're still learning, it is all the top four ranked champions. So you got the champion of the Big Ten, Oregon. SEC Texas, ACC Miami, and the highest group of five in Boise State. Arizona State is the projected Big 12 champion, the only Big 12 team in the field with the number 12 seed. They got the win over BYU. Kind of a crazy finish if you want to check out those highlights for those of you that are interested. Kenny Dillingham on the field screaming at refs that the game's over. It's kind of a wild finish, but the rest of the field shakes out. Number five, Ohio State hosting number 12, Arizona State. Number six, Penn State hosting number 11, Indiana. Number seven, Notre Dame hosting number 10, SMU. And number eight, Georgia hosting number nine, Tennessee. Yeah, a couple of conference matchups there that you could probably switch up. I don't anticipate that we'll see a lot of conference on conference action in the first round, Will. I think they'll do a good job mixing that up and giving us a good TV product.
Yeah, they'll manipulate that when it's time. I think I, my old man yells at the cloud just again. Indiana, the only team they've played. I'm a Hoosier. I grew up there. Like I wanted Indiana to beat Ohio State. I want them to do well. They go out, they lose a game, the only real game they've played all year, and they're still in the playoff. I just the regular season means nothing. It's funny. My kid was asking me the other day that was UConn was playing a game in college basketball. Defending national two-time defending national champions in basketball, and Max was asking me who do you want to win this game, Daddy? And I just looked at him and I said, it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't. Like UConn's, maybe UConn loses a few games, maybe they go 27-10 or something like that. But UConn's making the tournament, and that's what it feels like in some capacity at this
When
point.
was the last
So,
time that the Big Ten, Ohio State still has to win to get in the Big Ten championship game? Texas has to win to get in. A&M has to win to get. When was the last time you remember conference championship races not being settled in mid to early November
see,
and
so
these
I don't
last
think
couple weeks is playing out?
I don't think that's true. I think if Ohio State plays Oregon in the conference championship game, I think both of them are in. I think if Texas plays Georgia in the SEC
You're
championship game, both of those teams are in.
correct.
The
You're
only
talking
thing you're
about
playing for is a bye.
well, and that's first off, I think that's significant. I think that is significant, number one. And also you're playing for a banner too, Lane Kiffin over there. Lane Kiffin didn't care about the conference championship. He doesn't have to worry about it now. But you have these teams like I think what's interesting is like a team like Tennessee who's had a nice season, but unfortunately they lost a couple games for them. They lost a couple games. All of a sudden, with all the upsets, some life is back into it for them. I think there's a lot more games across the landscape that I found myself checking in on throughout last Saturday, where I was like, I don't remember being this deep in the season, having this many games that impacted the championship race. So you might
See, I,
lose some of that elevated status amongst the Georgias and Alabamas of the world in the national championship race, and maybe the conference championship it doesn't it takes a notch down in the level of importance for it because you're talking about if you lose it, you still make the playoff. But winning an SEC title is still pretty cool, I think, and you do get to make the college football playoff as a bye. And if you're the SEC champion, like even Georgia with two losses, they go out and win the SEC, they're going to be at least the number two seed. They're going to have a pretty significant seed. So I think that still matters a great deal. It might be devalued to an extent, but it still matters to
I
win
mean,
that.
so it's interesting that you say that you've been consuming the product extensively because I have not. I mean, I'm a college football fanatic. I love Florida, but I wasn't watching the A&M Alabama game the other day. I saw the score and I went, "Oh, that's interesting." Or
A&M Auburn,
the A&M Auburn
yeah,
and the Alabama Oklahoma game.
Oklahoma, yeah.
I know what happened. I watched a little bit of it. It was on the TV, that sort of stuff. And maybe it's just that I'm old and I got four kids and I got responsibilities and all that sort of stuff. But I think part of it is that those games don't actually decide anything. And they decide something, but they don't like the argument to me has always been that the teams that make it all the way through, whether it was the BCS where you got the final two, you were leaving some damn good teams out. And the argument, even with the Final Four, and I think last year you could make this argument, especially with Florida State and Georgia, is you were leaving some very good teams out. I don't think you can make that argument now. I think there are teams in this tournament who I don't think are very good. And I think we're going to find that out, and maybe we'll have some upsets there, and it'll be fun. And I'll watch damn near every game, damn near every playoff game. The question is going to be is how many people 3 years from now are watching the A&M Auburn game because they recognize that exactly what I recognize with UConn, where it's like, it doesn't matter, they'll be in the playoff anyway.
Did that game matter to Auburn?
I mean, sure,
Did
look,
did it
it
matter to Florida that we beat Ole Miss?
yeah, it did, but it mattered to me as a Florida fan and what it means for the Florida program.
Right. So
It,
those
it
games, it's the same thing. It's the same thing in those games too, where from a playoff perspective, A&M is now on life support. They can't lose another game. So if they lose to Texas, they're out of the playoff. Whereas if they beat Texas, they still have life. So it just because it didn't matter on that Saturday, it didn't literally knock them out on that Saturday. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It just you just don't understand the full impact of it yet.
no, I
You
see.
delay the understanding of the full impact of it, in my
No, I mean,
opinion.
I think what it really means is that so I can remember when Florida lost to Ole Miss in 2008. In fact, I can remember exactly where I was sitting when they missed the extra point. And then I can remember exactly what I was doing when Tebow didn't get the fourth down. And I thought that was the end of the season. Like I thought that Florida was not going to be able to get back into it. And they needed some things to happen for them to be able to get back into it. So what that meant was I was watching every single team that was in front of them, and probably even a couple who were behind them, the whole way through the season, rooting like crazy against each of those teams to lose. In this format, it wouldn't have mattered.
So
Florida would have lost that game to Ole
for
Miss, and
every
I'm like,
example
whatever, who
you
cares?
for every example you give on that level, where that year we did have a national championship team, one of the three times in program history we've ever won the national championship, by the way, in the 100+ seasons of Gator football. I could give you 5 examples to 10 examples of teams that we had that were awesome that maybe they lost at the wrong time, immediately off the top of my head. 0-1. That game, the 9/11 game gets pushed back with Tennessee. You play them in the swamp the last game, you lose that 0-1 Gator team was awesome. Those guys were great. Can you imagine that team if there was a 12-team playoff field, what
Yeah,
the damage they could have done?
so
They
you're
could have made
telling
a
me
run.
that so you're telling me that the regular season mattered.
It
is what you're
does.
telling me.
The regular season matters, but it's not the end
That
all be all to where one mistake, one little thing knocks you out of it
See,
completely.
that's the point.
But
The
Will,
point
we
is
haven't
that if
seen.
you're
But
teetering on the
even in that
edge,
system, they didn't get it right. You had undefeated teams like Auburn in the BCS era get left out. You had an undefeated team last year get left out of the playoffs. So even in those systems, it was amazing to win a national championship because it was so hard because the systems were so flawed that you left out teams that even could have had a case that had cases for the national championship.
yeah.
You're
And
not
again,
gonna
I
you're not
so
gonna have that anymore. I don't care who the 13th team is. I could care less about
well,
the third. I don't feel bad for them at this
but
point. Like you
but
can't make a field of 12. That's on you, buddy. Like
But
I don't feel bad about
this is exactly my point though. So I love sabermetrics. One of the things that got me back into baseball was the fact that the nerd in me gets to look at different numbers. It's one of the things I write about all the time, right? Numbers trying to predict what's going on the football field. But one of the things I actually like about football, better than baseball, is that in baseball, if I know what Otani's wins above replacement is going to be for a year, and I know what Clayton Kershaw is going to give to the Dodgers, and I know what Mookie Betts is, I can tell you almost within a win or two how many wins they're going to win over, how many games they're going to win over a 162 game season. And so the only thing I have to care about then is, and really, you can see this with the Phillies this year. You can see this with the Dodgers this year. They jumped out to giant leads, and the only thing you really basically had to worry about was how are they going to be able to perform once it gets to October. And sabermetrics has taken a lot of sort of that nuance and the arguing out of baseball. Like I can remember when Miguel Cabrera won the MVP with a triple crown. Now we're really getting into esoteric space for college football fans. But Miguel Cabrera wins the triple crown for the Tigers, and the argument was him or Trout. And Trout was playing for a crappy Angels team, but Trout had like two of the best seasons that anybody's ever had. And Cabrera's seasons weren't as good, but Cabrera wins the MVP. So you have this argument between a guy who's doing something historical and a guy who's also doing something historical, but the value of those is very, very different. And the numbers, because people understand those now, Trout just wins the MVP in 2024 if he has that exact same season. And that's what I fear is happening in college football is a lot of the enjoyment and a lot of the interest for me at least came from arguing between the fourth and the fifth team, wondering, can I get up to fourth or fifth for my team? And I get it. If you're Michigan State, that sucks. And if you're BYU, that sucks. And if you're SMU and Indiana, that sucks. I don't give a shit about those teams. I'm a Gators fan. And so I look at it and I go, if Florida makes the playoff at 9-3 and goes on a run and wins the national championship, I will celebrate it, but it's not the same as winning a championship going 13-1, 14-1.
Well, we've
It's
our
not the
three
same.
titles, we've lost games. We've lost games
One,
to Florida. Yeah,
one game.
right, right. But there's a lot of champions that win with zero losses. They win titles with zero losses. LSU was undefeated in 2019. Do our titles mean less because LSU didn't lose a game in that season? I don't
No,
think
because they were
so.
both under that because they were all under a system that actually valued the regular season. Now we don't. Indiana
But
can go out
I
there and
don't
look like
think
complete garbage against Ohio State,
I
and
also
we go,
think
oh well, that's fine. We'll
look
just put
Ole
them one
Miss.
slot below Ohio
We
State.
both said last week that we thought Ole Miss was the best team Florida is going to play this year, and that included Texas, that included Georgia. Ole Miss isn't going to the playoffs now. They're not going to the playoffs, so the
Just wait,
regular season matters. The
just
regular
wait.
season does matter.
No, that one game mattered, but the other two losses really didn't. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like,
But the other two, that one game mattered because the other two losses happened. So we
right,
could go in circles on this for a while, but
we will
I
because you're wrong, but that's fine.
we'll go in circles. We'll wrap up. We'll wrap up. We got plenty of more weeks to argue this, but it is an interesting conversation because on the one hand, the old school college football fan in me, there's part of me that does agree with what you're saying, Will. I'm not totally against what you're saying, but I'm just trying to look at the new perspective here too, trying to see it.
All
So
right, you young whippersnapper, I'll have you over on my side at some point along the way.
yeah, all right, man. All right. Hey, great win. Awesome time to be a Gator right now. You're looking ahead. Got a couple of years of DJ Lagway. We got a good game here against Florida State coming up this weekend. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We wanted to get this episode out uh, before Thanksgiving so that, or get it up on hopefully Wednesday here so that you have something to listen to when you're traveling. So we appreciate all the support throughout the season. It's been a crazy season. I can't wait to really revisit it in the off season because there's going to be a lot of interesting points to look at. Will, I'll let you get the final word before we get out of here.
Yeah, so everybody's giving Lagway credit, and they should. But really, the thing that turned the season around was Max. I took my 9-year-old Max down to the LSU game. He turned it around. They haven't lost since Max has been in the swamp this year. So, hopefully, pray for the Gasparilla Bowl for me so I can take him there because we'll be in town, and boy, that kid would love to go to another game. So, plus, I'm pretty sure there'd be a Harmonic Woods tailgate if we get the Gasparilla Bowl. So, if you want to meet me, pray for the Gasparilla Bowl because I'll be there in Tampa, trying to escape my mother-in-law and
This is
go
the
to the
only
game.
show where you can hear about having the highest standards of the regular season and the sentence "pray for the Gasparilla Bowl" in this within a 5 minute period of
Hey,
each.
that's just for Max. Like Max has been like he was so disappointed I didn't take him back down for the Ole Miss game. So he keeps asking like when are we going again? When are we going again? And he's so desperate for football. He's like, Dad, Eagles, Eagles. And I'm like, I'm not taking you down to that madhouse. They'll throw some batteries at us. So
Well,
anyway,
wear the right shirt. Wear a green shirt. You'll be fine. You'll be
there
fine.
you go. I
Bring a
don't
pack
know.
of batteries. Join the pack.
We'll go see him play the Cowboys, and I'll put him in silver and I'll put him in a Cowboys shirt, and we'll
Maybe
see
you
how
could
things
turn the
turn out.
Cowboys around too. Good luck for them too.
Nobody can do that, man. Cooper Rush, no thanks.
All right, everybody. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.